Johnson Magic, as one of the best athletes America has ever produced. That name will live on in history. He was born in Lansing, Michigan, and went on to become a worldwide basketball icon after rising from the poor streets. Magic was more than simply a player when wearing the Los Angeles Lakers jersey. He was the epitome of the Showtime period, when basketball became art and the world was in awe of his magical passes. He reached the top of the Hall of Fame with 5 NBA titles, 3 MVP honors, 12 All-Star appearances, and numerous assist records. Magic became a cultural figure and a representation of the American dream outside of the court. He became a role model for generations of sportsmen after rising from poverty to become a billionaire, astute investor, and co-owner of the Dodgers, Sparks LFC, and Commanders, and conquering the outside world, adding value to the community, and becoming a lasting icon. In addition to winning on the court, however, there was a sorrow that few could fathom hidden behind that glowing smile and brilliant grandeur. But when Magic revealed he was HIV positive in 1991, at the height of his career, it was a worldwide shock and in the view of society at the time, a death sentence. The world was rocked. My colleagues pulled away. He became an outsider as prejudice and public distrust increased. But the days that followed were more about fighting the illness and loneliness hour by hour than they were about the NBA Finals. He had to endure a lifetime of medication, deal with a persistent dread of dying, and bear the guilt of being a survivor, while witnessing friends and comrades die from the same sickness. The glory disappeared, leaving only a guy in the dark. A troubling question then surfaced. Would Magic Johnson be able to overcome this faded gloom with the help of fame, fortune, and a legendary career? Or would he always be plagued by an incurable pain? Irvin Johnson Jr. was born in Lansing, Michigan, in the summer of 1959, but rather under the shadow of poverty and the hardships of a working-class family. Irvin Sr., his father, got up early every morning to drive a garbage truck around the city while working long hours at an auto factory. Christine, his mother, was a school janitor who earned a little extra money by discreetly cleaning classrooms. Their small house had nothing to brag about but love. However, the boy was still vulnerable to the harshness of the outer world despite that affection. Irvin frequently went on garbage runs with his father when he was younger. It was an obligation to lessen his parents' burden, not a choice. However, the picture of a scrawny black youngster holding trash bags had heroic meaning for other children. They made fun of him and gave him the cruel moniker Garbage Man. The Garbage Boy. His boyhood became a series of days filled with shame as a result of such taunts, which pierced his sensitive heart. He was aware that his father was a solid, trustworthy man whose job provided for the family. But the mockery and contemptuous glances from classmates stuck with him. Instead of feeling happy every morning at school, he was afraid of being called out and confronted with ridicule. Iran's soul was deeply scarred by poverty and societal prejudice. But despite the fact that his parents lavished his children with unending affection, the small boy started to ponder that his value depends solely on the garbage bags his father picked up. Is it possible for someone like him to escape this cycle of disdain? The youngster gripped desperately to a basketball during the silent Lansing evenings, as though he were clinging to a huge secret of his life. But the ball was more than simply a game to Iran. It was his only way out, a place where he was acknowledged and heard. He was no longer garbage guy when the ball hit the concrete. Instead, he was a powerful, free child who could rise above the mocking looks and taunts. His only friend who didn't make fun of him was that ball, a mirror showing a different future in which Irvin could demonstrate to the world his worth, and that he was more than just a garbage worker's son. With his eyes burning through the mist and his shirt drenched in perspiration, he silently made his way to the court each morning before the city stirred. He put his anguish, his dread, and his tenuous hope that one day people would recognize him for his skill rather than his origins into every shot and dash. But despite Lansing's poverty and the cruelty of his peers, something great was beginning to take shape in his heart. A strong yearning to get out of the shadows. But that desire, together with the deep wounds in his spirit from years of humiliation, would serve as Magic Johnson's motivation to transform from a humiliated youngster into an enduring legend. With every year that went by, Irvin Johnson's desire to get out of the concrete courts of Lansing intensified, for the former garbage man youngster had grown into a towering young man with fiery eyes and hands that seemed to be designed to hold that orange ball. But Magic Johnson brought all of his childhood aspirations and unresolved emotional scars with him when he enrolled at Michigan State University. But there, he discovered a new platform and an opportunity to show the world that he was more than just the unfortunate child who was made fun of. Razor. He was a rising star. The NCAA championship game between Indiana State and Michigan State in 1979 turned into a pivotal event. Larry Bird, the solemn white kid from Indiana, who would go on to become Magic Johnson's biggest opponent, faced him on that court. But everyone in America watched that fight because it was a confrontation of two universes, not only for the national championship. A struggling black child from Lansing faces forth against a rural American white idol, a tense, dramatic, and full of significance outside of athletics. But Magic and Michigan State emerged victorious in the contest. A star was born on that day. But Irvin Johnson went from being made fun of by his peers as a child to becoming a household name in America. For the first time, they saw Magic instead of a garbage guy when the spotlight flashed on his face. The miracle of basketball, a representation of aspiration and hope. However, a trail of pressure and invisible loneliness emerged behind that triumph. Behind the smiles and applause, Magic became the focus of everyone's attention when he was praised as a man who brings magic. But people started to assume that he would constantly triumph, shine, and make people happy. That was a heavy load for a young man in his early 20s. He frequently asked himself, was he truly worthy? Could he carry the weight of a nation's dreams and expectations in the silent nights that followed the bright lights? For the light, which was occasionally too strong, could also create shadows, and Magic, in the moments of greatest adulation, felt empty inside. But that day marked a turning point in his life, a voyage where loneliness and glory coexisted, where every triumph leaves an unseen wound, but where the loneliness increases with the volume of adulation. He became a legend after winning the 1979 championship. But however, it also condemned him to the status of an icon, forcing the true guy to conceal himself behind the spotlight. But Magic Johnson had little time to enjoy the victories of his youth after leaving the NCAA glory of 1999. He soon entered the NBA, a much harsher environment with demands and expectations far greater than anything he had encountered in that crucial but championship game against Larry. The Bird. Magic was chosen first overall in the 1979 draft by the Los Angeles Lakers. The career officially began an amazing journey the day he landed in the city of neon lights, where Hollywood and the sports stage converged. But Magic was more than just a player. At 69, he had a vibrant body and a very imaginative mind. He reinterpreted the role of the point guard. He turned the Lakers into a theatrical troupe in just one season, making every game an incredible show. The arena was electrified by each passer's song and each rapid break's lightning bolt. But Magic Johnson's unforgettable smile was the focal point of this brilliant era, which they dubbed the Showtime Lakers. But Magic guided the Lakers to 5 titles within the 1,980 seconds. But 1,980, 1,982, 1,985, 1,987, 1,988. Won 3 MVP honors while continuously pushing the limits of basketball with his lightning-fast skilled, stunning no-look passes and seemingly impossible but flawlessly accurate assists enthralled fans all around the world. He, together with James Worthy and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, transformed the Lakers into a force that defeated every opponent. A cultural symbol in American social life as well as in athletics. But Magic rose to prominence around the world, appearing on television, appearing on magazine covers, and appearing on every stage America constructed for its idols. However, the blinding beam burnt instead of just illuminating. But behind the glittering championship trophies and the cheers of thousands of spectators was a man who was getting more and more worn out. Magic lost his tranquility due to the NBA's demanding schedule. The constant media attention and the pressure to always shine. On certain evenings, he would leave the court with legs as heavy as lead and his body exhausted. He still had to give the fans that beautiful smile, though. He sat by himself in the locker room, heart heavy and perspiration still wet. As the lights went down and the spectators dispersed, and every excellent thing has a price, Magic was the only one who knew it. In addition to being a sensation, he was imprisoned by the very fame he brought about. When everyone wanted Magic to triumph and be happy, few, however, were aware that the smile concealed long nights spent battling loneliness, persistent back pain, and eyes clouded by insomnia. There was no space for weakness or breakdown in the spotlight. But Magic, who had previously been a young guy motivated by a desire to escape poverty, now carried a new responsibility, but the burden of unending expectations. He was trusted by the entire country, but however, this also meant that he had changed. The unrelenting interviews, cruel games, and endless trips created a vortex from which he was unable to break free. As a restless soul as well as a weary body with a price of greatness. Sometimes, in the chilly hotel room, he asked himself, is this truly what I wanted? And does anyone sense the tiredness behind this smile? But Magic became a legend because to Showtime, but it also made him the most lonely person on stage. He was never permitted to flicker since he had to be the brightest light at all times. The Dream Team won 992. Two words that will always be remembered in the history of world sports. But Magic Johnson was the focal point of that glowing image. He entered an even larger stage where everyone on the planet was watching, following intense years with the Lakers, 5 titles, an unquestionable superstar status. For 1992 in Barcelona, for the first time, every NBA star from the United States was in the same lineup. Magic Johnson, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, Michael Jordan, and Larry Bird. The man stood among them as a symbol of hope and courage, having just survived the HIV shock. The entire globe applauded him. His smile was dazzling, as if the illness were just a passing breeze. As Magic appeared on the US team's number 15 shirt, every pass he made on the court ignited the arena. The fans cheered with every shot. He was a living example of the American spirit to millions of admirers. Unwavering, dazzling, eternal. However, Magic concealed the invisible fissures in his soul behind that smile and his burning eyes in front of the cameras. He was aware that he was no longer the carefree Magic of the past, but rather an icon with high expectations. A black hero in the eyes of the people. The globe and America wanted more than just him to prevail. They insisted that he be powerful, flawless, and an unbeatable role model at all times. However, who could be flawless all the time, but who could carry on the black community's history? Fight a condition that is still viewed as a death sentence, and continued to project an optimistic, dazzling superstar image. His heart ached throughout the thunderous cheers, not from the illness, but from the loneliness that came with being famous. In actuality, Magic Johnson was constantly caught up in his own splendor. He had to have his smile on for every public appearance in order to project an unwavering image. He was a source of pride and a role model for millions to follow. But he was also a prisoner of relentless expectations. Even if deep down he had anxious, restless nights wondering if he would live to see his wife and kids tomorrow. He was fighting for more than just himself as a prosperous black guy in America, for more than the demanding games. The stress of proving that a black person could achieve success and overcome discrimination drained his spirit. Only the magic of grins and creative passes were visible to his Dream Team comrades. However, the true Magic spent many nights by himself in hotel rooms, contemplating mortality, the children who may lose their father, and a fearsome but powerful cookie. But Magic Johnson was raised to the height of fame by Barcelona 100,992, but it also imprisoned him in an unseen cage where everyone was watching. He was not permitted to be weak. The bright brilliance turned into the chains of a soul that broke daily. The world, not just American basketball, but would never forget. November 7th, 1991, a press conference room in Englewood, California, was packed with hundreds of reporters. Everyone was expecting for a significant statement. From the guy who had made the NBA a worldwide sensation and guided the Los Angeles Lakers to 5 titles. But no one could have predicted that in a matter of minutes, the course of sports history would change as Magic Johnson emerged. Still wearing a dapper suit and sporting that well-known smile, with a tiny trembling in his eyes, he took the microphone gently and spoke in a calm, quiet voice. "I will be retiring from the NBA today due to my positive HIV test results." The room went silent in that instant, for the world appeared to stop breathing. Cameras ceased to flash, and pens ceased to scribble. A star at the height of his career, a behemoth with an unending smile and an image of health, he is now condemned to death by a sickness that society still sees as impending disaster. But more quickly than any past wizardry had ever thrown, the word got out. In a matter of hours, blazing red headlines appeared in every major newspaper and television program. But Magic Johnson has a positive HIV test result. HIV was at the time associated with severe judgment, dread, and discrimination. It was referred to as the illness of shame and the killer. The NBA's most illustrious figure had now come to represent that anxiety. But once Victoria's teammates started to distance themselves from him, a single scrape on the court might spread the illness. According to some refrained from sharing the locker room and from touching him. But friends drifted off, handshakes grew uncomfortable, there were fewer conversations, and suddenly America's hero turned into a cursed misfit. But Magic was very aware of the chilly caution that lurked beneath the compassionate words on TV and the flashing cameras of the press. A silent rejection. That day he maintained that courageous smile to reassure everyone. However, nobody was aware that Magic Johnson sat by himself in his black sedan with his head in his hands and started crying when the doors to the press conference closed and the noise outside subsided. And it was the weeping of a guy who thought he was nearing the end of his life, not the sorrow of a superstar who had lost his career. HIV meant death in 1991, quick, vicious, and unavoidable. But Magic was unable to go to sleep and lay motionless in bed for the subsequent nights when the home lights turned off. His heart was beating like a countdown clock in the dark. But Cookie, his young expectant wife, came to mind. He wondered if the unborn child would ever know its father. He considered his aged parents, who had given their lives for him, and were now compelled to witness their seemingly unbeatable son turn into a patient. And he imagined death as a guest who knocked on his door every night rather than as a far-off idea. America continued to yell Magic's name outside. He was still referred to as a hero, but he was just a man shaking in front of destiny behind closed doors. He thought back to his early years, when he was called Garbage Man and made fun of for being poor. He pledged at the time to use basketball to establish his value, and he had succeeded. The world was under his control. However, in light of a blood test result, all that grandeur suddenly felt pointless. No amount of money, notoriety, or victories could buy him another day of tranquility. But on certain evenings, Magic would get out of bed, go to the bathroom, turn on the faucet, and cry quietly, because sobbing were muffled by the sound of gushing water, so nobody in the house could hear them. Those tears conveyed the hopelessness of a guy who thought he had reached his breaking point. Magic. Johnson was no longer unbeatable. He was simply a run, a black man with HIV, and a social outcast. His heart was permanently scarred on November 7th, 1991. It was more than simply his basketball retirement. That day he faced racism, loneliness, and the dread of dying in a fight for his life. The world saw a courageous Magic Johnson grinning reassuringly. But only he knew that behind that smile were countless sleepless nights when he sobbed by himself, waiting for death to arrive at any time. But the world was shocked when Magic Johnson left that tragic press conference. But few realized that the real suffering wasn't in the headlines. The woman behind him had her heart, being silently torn apart by it. Cookie was expecting their first child when Magic revealed his HIV diagnosis. As a lady prepared to become a mother and dreamed of having a whole family, those ought to have been the happiest months of her life. Rather, she was thrust into an indescribable nightmare. But Cookie almost passed out of the early days following the heartbreaking news. She turned to see her husband, whom she adored, the guy whose grin had enthralled her since their college days, but who was now facing execution. She lived in crippling fear beyond that. But did she also have the virus? But would the unborn kid in her womb suffer a terrible destiny before it was even born? She cried, clutched her stomach, and prayed for a miracle throughout those long nights. The outer world was cruel. People gossiped and whispered, but Cookie would leave magic. According to some so who were harsher, mocked her for ruining her life by continuing to live with a philandering spouse and enduring the fallout. The young lady's heart was deeply pierced by those cruel remarks, but she remained silent, clutched her husband's hand, and supported him. The Cookie had the option to leave, but she left a man with a fatal illness, and no one would have blamed her, but she didn't. She made the decision to stay, love, and make sacrifices. Subsequently, the test results turned into a miracle that saved lives. The Cookie test came up negative. Baby EJ, the child she was carrying, also tested negative. It seemed like a mountain had been lifted from her shoulders at that very moment. Instead of crying out of fear, she did it out of thankfulness and faith in the continued existence of love and miracles. But nevertheless, the virus left unseen wounds, even though it did not kill her or her child. They had to put up with nasty rumors, live under suspicious looks from society, and learn to ignore curious glances whenever they went out in public together. Cookie was repeatedly asked hard questions. But how are you going to stay with him? But do you not feel fear? However, she always responded with a respectful quiet. But when the storm hit, Cookie believed that love wasn't about running away. The idea was to weather it together by holding hands. But she became the cornerstone and anchor that prevented Magic from totally collapsing as a result of that decision. But Cookie was Magic Johnson's flickering but unwavering light, guiding him through his darkest moments. If HIV was the darkness engulfing him, additionally, baby EJ, who was born safely, represented a miracle. In addition to being a source of happiness for the family, proud seeds of life could sprout even in the deepest shadows. However, that decision came at a huge cost. Cookie gave up her carefree youth, lived in constant terror, and persevered in the face of hostility from society as well as her husband's illness. Every move she made was closely observed. Every smile carried an incomprehensible agony. Their love became more than simply a romance after that. It turned into evidence of the incredible strength of devotion, selflessness, and forgiveness. The Cookie transformed a difficult decision into a timeless proclamation. Her love was the only remedy that kept Magic's will alive, since she persisted even when the world turned its back on her. Family a peaceful sanctuary for many. However, Magic Johnson's heart was repeatedly broken by the storms that devastated the area. It appeared that everything would calm down after Cookie decided to stay, and EJ was miraculously born. But destiny never provided him with a simple route. But Andre Johnson, Magic's oldest kid, was born in 1981 to Melissa Mitchell, before two Magic meeting Cookie, who spent the majority of his childhood with his mother, and only spent the summers with his father. Andre sensed an unseen distance from Magic from an early age, one that neither basketball success nor enormous fortune could fill. Andre frequently felt abandoned while the Lakers and the glittering lights of Hollywood absorbed Magic, even though his father adored him. His oldest son's heart was permanently damaged by his father's unceasing absence. There's a knowing guilt in Magic's heart. Although he had never been a full parent to his first child, he could be a national hero. In the midst of the HIV nightmare, EJ Irvin Johnson III was born like a miracle. However, he introduced Magic, which presented an equally formidable obstacle. The world focused on the Johnson family after EJ came out as gay in 2013. Magic had to overcome his own preconceptions in order to come to terms with his son, a man who was brought up in the brutal world of sports and carried the image of America's masculine symbol. But he acknowledged that at first he was perplexed and even disappointed, not because his son wasn't deserving of love, but rather because he was afraid EJ would be treated as cruelly by society as he had been when he revealed his HIV diagnosis. But love from a parent won out, but Magic became EJ's strongest ally after learning to listen and encourage his son. A strong message was conveyed by the picture of a parent confronting the public with his arm around his colorfully attired son. The family is the safest place to be authentic, and love transcends gender. But the adopted daughter, Eliza, was not exempt from conflict either. Melissa was raised in a loving environment after being taken in by magic and cookies at the age of 3 days. However, the Johnson family's tranquility was once again put to the test. Alyssa and her pals had a horrific home invasion in 2018. Strangers barged in. The young girl almost avoided death. When violence broke out, both physical and psychological scars resulted from the experience. That memory was like a recurrent nightmare for Magic. He had always been afraid of dying, and now he had to witness his adopted daughter almost lose hers due to the harshness of life. He spent hours at her side in the days following the tragedy, listening to her worries and embracing her as if his arms could protect her from everything outside. As a result, the Johnson family was never limited to glitzy red carpet pictures or beaming smiles at Christmas parties. The cracks, battles, tears, and seemingly unsurmountable pain were behind them. The distance was carried by Andre. EJ encountered discrimination from society. Elisa barely made it out alive. In her father's heart, they were all daggers. However, it was because of these struggles our family emerged as a pillar that uplifted Magic after every setback. Cookie never wavered in her support of her husband, despite their disparate upbringings and trajectory. The children were the light that showed him that the real meaning of life was found in the enduring love that unites a family rather than on the court or in multi-million-dollar transactions. And that love held Magic Johnson upright, so that whenever the world referred to him as a legend, he knew that a tumultuous but unwavering family was behind him. But Magic Johnson still had to deal with an even bigger shadow that followed him around with every breath after all the upheavals in his family. Death, AIDS, but HIV were more than just illnesses in some 1990s. Anybody with the virus was labeled by society as having a death sentence, but people avoided each other muttered, and were afraid that a simple touch might bring them to their knees. HIV was referred to be the killer disease by the media, and persons who had it were treated the same as the Walking Dead. People died one by one. In underprivileged black communities and the LGBT community, where stigma was widespread and medical expertise was scarce. Friends, Magic recognized faces that had previously stood on stages or in studios, laughed, and died one after the other. Funerals came after funerals. They weren't even in their 30s. Some had not yet fulfilled their aspirations. Laughter names and looks disappeared as if they had never happened. In the midst of that ocean of grief, Magic continued to exist. However, survival was a tragedy in and of itself. We started to experience the survivor's guilt, an agony too complicated to describe. Why me? When my brothers and friends are gone forever, why am I still here? It was like another blow to his heart every time he learned of another friend who had died from AIDS. He once said that he would spend a lot of nights sitting by himself in the dark, remembering voices and faces and feeling as though those souls were all around him, asking the same question. But when we're not here, why are you? I'm so tired of being plagued by that question. But Magic took a moment every morning to collect himself. He put his palm on his chest and felt his breath and heartbeat before the question replayed itself in his head. Is this my last day? He had a countdown-like lifestyle. Every day that goes by is like the slow tolling of a death nail rather than a gift. The nightmares persisted, but in his dream he collapsed on the court. Cookie and his kids sobbed by his hospital bed, and the fans that had once applauded him turned away, believing nothing but chilly darkness. He would wake up in cold sweats from those dreams and spend hours gazing into the mirror and questioning whether he had the fortitude to face another day. But Magic had to learn to live like a man waiting to die at the age of 32. When life should have been opening its biggest doors. But he saw fear in civilizations, caution in the eyes of his co-workers, and powerlessness in his own. But HIV transformed him from a hero into a condemned outcast, from an unbeatable icon to a weak man. There was a terrified man in a dark room who wasn't sure if he would wake up the next morning behind the forced optimistic grins on television and the stirring speeches. But the harsh reality was that his loneliness increased with his level of fame. A few people in America knew, he sobbed, but everyone knew he was HIV positive. The friends vanished every night. The colleagues stayed apart. Even those who had previously supported him became weary. But Magic saw that this illness did more than simply destroy the body. It severed a person's ties to the outside world. He therefore felt himself gradually dying, even though he was still alive. Cookie and his kids were the things that kept him together over those years. However, the fixation persisted despite their love. But will he still have a father when he grows up? He thought to himself as he watched young EJ sleep soundly. But will he have to face losing his father like so many others? But when he held Elisa in his arms, he trembled with the fear that one day his daughter might see him lying motionless. Magic Johnson's early 1990 seconds weren't just about fighting medication. The shadow of death consumed those years. He did not survive. He was real, and in that life every second was a melancholic tune with an unanswered echo of the query, why me? And while Magic Johnson was living under the shadow of death in the early 1990 seconds, medical research started to carefully open vulnerable doors for HIV patients. It was his friends and comrades died one by one, and the illness was still viewed as a death sentence. The first antiviral medications emerged, offering a ray of hope. Like a man drowning and struggling to breathe, Magic clung to that light. Every medication he took was more than just therapy. It was a prayer, a short-term agreement to allow him an extra day to live, a chance to see his wife and kids, and a chance to demonstrate that he hadn't sacrificed his body. They weren't a complete miracle, but numerous adverse consequences were included.